Well, it's so good to be at Buckhead Church today. As Andy said, my name's Adam, and really excited to be here. Also want to say a special hello and a good morning to the folks up at Browns Ridge Church, where I have a privilege of being the lead pastor there. And Browns Ridge, why don't you guys make some noise? We can hear you. They're probably screaming loudly. It's a rowdy bunch up there. But this is a special day for me because I used to attend Buckhead Church back when it was in the grocery store. Anybody attend Buckhead Church back when it was on Roswell Road in the grocery store? Yeah. Buckhead Church for life. Those folks right there raising their hands. But I actually sat in the balcony right up there somewhere on opening day when this building opened and we moved from the grocery store into this unbelievable facility. And I knew it'd be a really important day. And so I ended up carving my name in one of the seats. If you look closely, I'm just kidding. I didn't do that. But it's amazing to stand here almost 11 years later and think about all that this church has accomplished in this community. I mean, you think about the nonprofit organizations that you all have partnered with, the schools that you've made better and you've helped them go further, faster. I mean, this community is certainly a better place because Buckhead Church exists here. And also you think about the environments that are created inside this church. You think about the small groups that meet throughout the city. There's really no telling how many lives have been changed over the last 11 years since Buckhead Church moved into this space. So it's truly extraordinary what you all are a part of. Another reason why this day is special for me is because when I attended Buckhead Church in those early days, I attended with a girl that I was dating named Kelly, and we actually sat up there together on opening day. And Kelly later became my wife. She's seated down front with me this morning. And then a few years after that, we had twin sons that are now 8 years old. And then a few years after that, we had another son who's now 4 years old. And then a few years after that, we had another son who is now 2 years old. So needless to say, our life's a little bit crazy. Not too long ago, somebody asked me, it was at the end of a weekend, they said, hey, how was your weekend? I said, it was crazy. And they were like, oh, like what happened? I mean, they wanted the story, they wanted the scoop on why my weekend was crazy. And I was like, well, sorry to disappoint you, but like every weekend is crazy. You know, I mean, 4 kids at home, no school to send them to for 48 hours. It always is crazy. And one of the ways the craziness plays out with us is in the condition of our kitchen table. Now, would anybody be willing to admit today that their kitchen table might look a little bit like this? Yeah, a few of you. Yeah, there's no shame. There's no judgment. All of us in here have some sort of mess, okay? So if it's not your kitchen table, it may be a closet that you've got so stuffed full of stuff that you pity the person who tries to open it. It may be a basement. It may be one of those drawers at the end of the counter that you kind of just scrape stuff into as things collect on the counter. You kind of just scrape them over into your junk drawer. And then the only time you ever take anything out of the junk drawer is when it won't close all the way. Like, that's the only reason to take something out. But ours plays out in the kitchen table. It's like a magnet for the stuff in our home that doesn't have a home. And just some of these things you may recognize. This is an Amazon Prime box. I don't know why we hold on to these things, but especially when one's probably coming in the mail tomorrow, you know? Kids' toys, again, with 4 little ones, we have all sorts of toys. This is about as close as I'll get to a chainsaw in this season of life. Keys, this is a funny one to me because all of us have a place where we're supposed to hang up our keys when we get home. But why would we do that when we can come in and just throw them on the kitchen table? And then the funny thing is, like a couple hours later or a day or two later when we're getting ready to leave, we'll go look for them where they're supposed to be hanging up. And we'll be like, well, where are the keys? And it's like, well, they're in the same place that they always are. They are on the kitchen table. We have clothes of all sorts of different kinds that collect on our table. Books, of course, and our guys they like superheroes. And so we have several books of that one superhero that we all want to be when we grow up, Captain Underpants. A lot of that going on. Just inviting you into my world a little bit here. And then, kids' artwork. This is another funny one to me that as parents, what is it about us that we won't throw away the kids' artwork when they bring it home? We feel like we've got to keep it for some amount of time. And there is a small chance that your child may become Pablo Picasso, but it's not going to be dependent on whether or not we save their artwork. So, we have this mess that constantly builds on our table. And what do we do when we're having somebody come over? Let's say some friends are coming over for dinner. Maybe we're hosting small group that week. What do? We scrape all this stuff up together, and then we find some place in our house to put it where it won't be seen. We want to hide our mess, right? So the other day I was doing this and we were cleaning up. For us, it's the laundry room. That's where we kind of hide our mess. And I go back into the laundry room with this stack full of stuff, and I turn around and I look, and there's 2 stacks on the floor from the last 2 times that we cleaned up. And I saw those and I was like, yeah, we've got some issues. We probably need some counseling or something. But, we all have a mess, and then there's certain days, that we just don't have it in us to clean up. Maybe the kids are crazy. Maybe somebody's sick. Maybe somebody just knocks on the door. We get that surprise visit. And in those moments, we have to invite someone into our mess. And as they're walking through our house and kind of stepping over stuff, we're apologizing. We're making excuses. We're trying to explain why the house looks this way, as if it doesn't always look this way. And as we apologize, what do people say? What do they say when we apologize for the mess in our lives? They say, don't worry about it. You kidding me? You think this is bad? You should come to my house. You should see what's going on in my world right now. And the reason is because there's this reality, it's true of all of us, that we all have a mess somewhere in our lives. And the mess in our life is not just physical. It's not just the closet, it's not just the junk drawer, it's not just the basement, it's not just the kitchen table. We also all have a mess that we carry around inside of us. We have decisions that we made that didn't turn out the way we wanted them to. We have regrets in our lives. We have seasons of our lives that we look back on with regret. We know that we damaged ourselves in those seasons, or maybe we damaged others in those seasons. Maybe it's something that was done to us. There's somebody in our past that we just have not been able to forgive and let go of them. And so we end up just carrying around anger and bitterness. We all have a mess somewhere inside us, and we do the same thing with the mess inside of us that we do the physical mess in our lives. We try to cover it up. We try to act like everything's fine. We smile and we say, oh yeah, life's great. But no matter how hard we try to cover it up, no matter how hard we try to hide it, the reality is we all have a mess. It's in our lives somewhere. And today, as we continue this journey through the life and the ministry of Jesus, I want to look at a scene from the life of Jesus that involves a table. And this scene also involves a mess, and a pretty significant mess, as we'll see. If you're just joining us, or maybe you've missed the last couple weeks, we're taking the first 90 days of this year, from January 1st to April 1st, and we're looking at the ministry of Jesus from the moment he stepped on the banks at the Jordan River until his death and resurrection that we'll celebrate at Easter. And as we journey through this, I want to give us a little bit of context of where we're diving in today. This right here is a map of first century Palestine. This is where Jesus lived his life and did his ministry. This is where Jesus lived. And you'll see Jerusalem down here. Obviously, that's a main location for a lot of what happened in Jesus' life. But the majority of his ministry took place about 70 miles north in this region known as Galilee. We'll zoom in a little bit here. And all throughout the gospel accounts of Jesus' life, we see him bouncing around through these different towns, teaching and helping people and healing people. And today we're gonna look specifically at the town of Capernaum and a man that worked there. It's right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, the northwest shore there. And the way Jesus interacts with this man says so much about what he came to do. It says so much about this new covenant that he was going to initiate. Now, up until this point, Jesus has made a pretty big splash. Anywhere he went, people left there talking about what they had seen. In fact, this is the way the gospel writer Luke puts it. Very early on in Jesus' ministry, he's finishing this account of this interaction Jesus had, and he said, and news about him spread through the whole countryside. And we see phrases like this again and again as it talks about what Jesus did in the days of his ministry. And essentially what the gospel writers were saying was that the word was out. The word on Jesus was out. Because everywhere Jesus went, he made a scene. The way he taught challenged the current religious regime. The way he helped people, the way he healed people, left people astonished. And they walked away and they couldn't help talking about what they had seen, what they had experienced, what they had heard. In fact, right before the scene that we're gonna look at today, Jesus was in Capernaum and he's in this home, and it says there's no room in the home or even outside the door. So we get the picture that people are out in the street kind of leaning in, trying to hear what Jesus was saying. And it says at the end of that account that as people left, they were in awe. And they all went back to their homes, they went back to their friends, they went back to their families, they went back to their jobs, raving about what they had just experienced. We'll pick up the account there. It says, as he went on from there, this scene that happened in Capernaum, he saw a man named Matthew. So at some point after this scene in Capernaum, he's moved on and he's run into this person named Matthew. Now Matthew worked right there on the shore of the Sea of Galilee in Capernaum. So it's very likely that Matthew had heard of Jesus. Again, the word was out on him. People couldn't help talking about him. And so as Jesus approaches him, Matthew may know him. He may have even been an eyewitness to some of the moments in Jesus' life where he was teaching or healing people or doing something miraculous. A couple of weeks ago, if you were with us, we talked about this interaction that Jesus had with James and Peter and John, where he did this fish trick. Well, that happened right on the shore at Capernaum. So there's a chance even that Matthew was a witness to that incredible event happening as well. So Matthew in his mind, he may have seen Jesus coming and had the thought of, you know what, I think I could be on board with him. He may have been familiar enough with Jesus' teaching to say, you know what, I think I could follow this guy. There was just one problem. Matthew was a tax collector. He was a tax collector. And in the first century, a tax collector was not only an undesirable occupation, it was seen as downright evil. The empire of Rome would require a certain amount of taxes from their regions, and what they would do is they would sell the rights to collecting these taxes. And then those people would take it and sell them again, and then they would sub it out again and sub it out again and sub it out again. So it created these tiers of people that were running the taxes back up to Rome. So you can imagine that by the time it got down to the people that were actually paying taxes, they ended up paying way more than what they actually owed, because each person along those tiers had to charge more than what was actually owed in order for them to keep the excess for themselves. So it's no surprise that people saw tax collectors as evil. They saw them really as licensed robbers in that day. And then to make matters worse, Matthew was really the worst type of tax collector. He was what was known as a custom house official, and these custom houses sat at major ports where boats would be bringing goods in and out, or a major intersection of the trade routes in those days. And custom house officials were notorious for making up a tax on just about anything. They could just make up a tax out of thin air and charge the person as they were on their way trying to travel one way or the other. And it gave them the opportunity to make just a ton of money off of essentially stealing it from these people. So tax collectors were bad, but Matthew was the worst of the worst, because he was a custom house official right there in Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. And so as Jesus approaches, he may be considering in his mind saying, you know what, I may be a follower of this guy. I think I could get on board with what Jesus is all about. But the moment his mind begins to drift there, he's met with a very clear answer. It's not possible. It's out of the question. See, Matthew would have thought he's disqualified. He's disqualified because Matthew is a sinner. And ultimately, Matthew is the worst type of sinner. So there's no chance for him to get on board with anything that Jesus might be doing. But then in his next move, Jesus does something so shocking. I mean, people around him, there's no telling how they responded in this moment. And again, it was a sign of things to come. He says this, follow me. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Now, when we see the invitation, follow me, in our modern day vernacular, it kind of could potentially sound like, hey, follow me and we'll see if you have what it takes. Follow me and we'll see if you can make the cut. Follow me and we'll see if you can keep up. Follow me and if you can keep your life on track and stay up with me and do the right things, you can keep following me. But the moment that your life begins to veer off, you can no longer follow me. That's not what this invitation was in the first century. When a teacher or a rabbi would look at someone and say, you know what, I want you to be my disciple. I want you to follow me. It was a tremendous honor. It was saying, hey, I have seen something in you. I approve of you. You do have what it takes. And I want you to follow me. This was a tremendous honor. It was a big deal. It was a huge invitation. And so the fact that Jesus would extend that to a tax collector, There's no telling how shocked the people were around him. Wait a second, Jesus. A tax collector, really? You're gonna invite a tax collector to follow you and to be a part of our group? Peter, James, and John from that fish trick story a couple weeks ago, that they may have been thinking to themselves, hey, Jesus, it was a big deal that you invited us, because we're like not the religious elite, we're just common fishermen, but a tax collector is a whole different deal. Really? You're gonna invite him? But again, Jesus was doing something brand new. And apparently tax collectors could get in on the action. Even the worst of the worst weren't disqualified. The account continues. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, so we've moved forward in the account. Sometime later, after Jesus calls Matthew, he ends up going up to have dinner at Matthew's house. And another gospel writer says that Matthew threw a banquet in honor of Jesus. And while they were there at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Now, the only people in that day and age that would have accepted an invitation to a tax collector's house would be someone that wouldn't mind being associated with someone like that. So you end up getting basically the outcasts of society. All the people that society looked down on, all the people that society kept at a distance. It reminds me of the movie that's out right now, The Greatest Showman. It's the story of P.T. Barnum when he created his circus in the mid 1800s. Basically, he went all throughout the city and he got all these outcasts and the people that society looked down on. He gathers them all together in one place and creates this great show. And society wasn't happy about it. They were protesting, they were angry. But this was similar to what was going on in Matthew's house when Jesus showed up. Yet all these people that society kind of distanced themselves from and society looked down on. But while society stood at a distance, judging and condemning the likes of Matthew, Jesus walks in and sits down to dine with him. And this was a huge deal. In the first century, you wouldn't eat with just anyone. You wouldn't share a meal with just anyone. You would only share a meal with the people that were closest to you in your life, your closest of friends, your closest of associates. And so as Jesus sat down, he was making a tremendous statement. He was telling Matthew and the others around that table, those tax collectors and sinners, he was saying, I am your friend. I am your friend. And there was no agenda. There was no bait and switch. Jesus didn't get up at the end of the meal and pull out a flip chart and try to sell him a timeshare or something. You ever been to one of those? Things are terrible. Beware of a free vacation, okay? That wasn't going on here. There was no agenda. There was no gotcha moment. And Matthew and his friends probably suspected one. I mean, as they sat there with Jesus having this meal, they probably thought to themselves, this is too good to be true. This is too good to be true. No one like Jesus has ever sat with us. So when's the other shoe gonna drop? When's Jesus gonna kind of turn the tables on us and tell us that we need to get our lives in gear? But that never happened. Jesus didn't have an agenda. He just came to say basically, look, for as long as you can remember, religion was counting you out, and now I am counting you in. I am your friend. The Pharisees, the religious elite of that day, they didn't like this. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? Why does he eat with them? They knew what this meant. They knew the significance of sitting down at a table and sharing a meal with someone. So why would he eat with them? How could he do this? Why would he do this? Pharisees knew that their job, the way they saw it, was they needed to keep separated from people like tax collectors and sinners in order to keep their life clean and be in good standing with God. See, they had an equation that worked out in their mind. And the equation for the Pharisees was this, that God was a friend of the righteous. God's a friend of the righteous. That's the way they saw it. God's a friend of those people that can get their act together and keep their act together. God's a friend of the people that can work really hard to obey all the rules. Well, maybe not all the rules, but nobody obeys all the rules, but at least the rules that are visible. That's who God's a friend of. You're gonna break some, but make sure those are the hidden ones. But if you can follow the ones that are visible, that's who God is a friend of. The way it worked in the mind of the Pharisees was that God hated sin. So he'd probably have a really hard time loving someone whose life is full of it. So if we could just work really hard to rid our lives of sin and stay away from anyone that's sinful, then and only then could we be a friend of God. God is a friend of the righteous. But then Jesus comes along. He invites Matthew to follow him. And then he goes to Matthew's house with his tax collector friends, his sinner friends, and he sits right down and he introduces an entirely new equation. Jesus said that God is a friend of sinners. God's a friend of sinners. And not just sinners that used to be sinners and now they've gotten their lives straightened out. Yeah, I was sinful in my past, but now I'm pretty good. No, God is a friend of sinners. I love the way the late author Brennan Manning says it. He says that God loves us as we are and not as we should be, because none of us are as we should be. God loves us as we are and not as we should be, because none of us are as we should be. God is a friend of sinners. So Jesus responds to the angst of the Pharisees. He says this. On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. It's a common sense phrase. Yeah, it made sense to everyone around there. The Pharisees were probably going, and Jesus? Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, the sick need a doctor, the healthy don't. But what does that have to do with this situation, Jesus? What does that have to do with God? What does that have to do with religion? And Jesus says everything. It has everything to do with what's going on with Matthew and his friends. It has everything to do with God. I came to show you what God is like. I came to show you what your heavenly Father is like. And I'm here to tell you that God, you think God's just a judge, but I'm here to tell you, no, God is a doctor. I have come to be a doctor to their sickness. I've not come to judge them. I've come to heal them. Jesus continues, he says, but go and learn what this means. And then he quotes this Old Testament verse, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. This came from the Old Testament book of Hosea. And the Pharisees would have been very familiar with this verse. They probably would have had it memorized. And Jesus uses this phrase here, go and learn, which is what a rabbi or a teacher in the first century would have used to tell one of their pupils, hey, you've missed it. You've missed the point entirely. You need to go back and relook at it. You need to go back and study it again. So Jesus saying this to the Pharisees was probably extremely challenging, probably extremely offensive to them. But he's telling them, hey, you've missed what was going on here. You know this verse, you have it memorized, but you're missing the point of it. Because the point of it is what is going on at the table with Matthew and his friends. I desire mercy. Mercy moves towards people. Sacrifice draws away. And this is what the Pharisees were so good at. They were so good at trying to remain clean and not have anything pollute their life. And in an effort to remain clean, they draw back and they sacrifice the tax collectors and sinners. Meanwhile, Jesus, in his mercy, moves towards them. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And this word call here is simply an invitation. I've not come to invite the righteous, but sinners. And Jesus wasn't saying, hey, Pharisees, you're righteous. Jesus was saying, you think you're righteous. You just think that your life is all put together, but the reality is you have a mess as well. And yeah, your mess may not look like the mess around this table, Pharisees, but we're all in the same boat. And you've got a mess as well. So I've got good news for you. I've not come to condemn people for the mess in their lives. I've come to help people with the mess in their lives. I've not come to judge them. I've come to heal them. But Jesus knew that in order to help people with their mess, he was gonna have to enter the mess. And notice what Jesus didn't do. Jesus didn't say, hey, Matthew, thanks for the invitation, but if you guys could just get your lives kind of back on track, if you guys could just straighten out everything, then I'll come dine with you. He didn't say, Matthew, you've got this label of tax collector and your friends are all sinners, and if we could just let some time pass and let that label fade a little bit, then I could associate with you. Hey guys, if you could just show me that you're really willing to change this time, if you could have a couple weeks of a good record, maybe a couple months of a good record, then I'll be a part of your life. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus walked in with the mess in the lives of the people surrounding this table, and he sat right down. And he said, I'm not waiting for you to get your act together before I will act. I'm not waiting for you to clean up your mess before I'll enter the mess with you. I have come to be your friend. I've come to help you. And Jesus says the same thing to you and to me today. We all have a mess in our lives. Some of us might be doing a little bit better than others. And Jesus is saying to us today that he's not waiting for us to clean everything up and get it all spotless and new and nice looking before he'll be a part of our lives. He's saying, no, I want to help you. I want to heal you. And I want to enter the mess. Whatever you're going through, whatever you're experiencing, I want to enter that mess with you. If we will just, like Matthew in the first century, invite him in. So, invite him in. Invite him into your mess. Invite him into your life. Invite him into your marriage. Invite him into that relationship. Invite him into that thing that's going on with your kids. Invite him into your job. Invite him into your financial picture and the things you're struggling through there. Invite him into that habit that you can't seem to break. You just keep struggling with the same thing over and over and over again. Whatever your mess is, invite him into that mess. Because here's the reality. Your mess won't disqualify you. It doesn't disqualify you. It actually prepares you for what he'll do. Because when he enters our mess, when he enters our life, he becomes a doctor to our sickness. He comes to heal us from our mess. And ultimately, he comes to forgive us and heal us from our sin. Because you see, Jesus wasn't just a friend to Matthew and the folks around this table. A short time after this scene, Jesus would go to the cross and become their savior. And he would go to the cross to pay for the sin and the mess in the lives of Matthew and his friends. And for the sin and the mess in the lives of the Pharisees. And for the sin and the mess in your life. And for the sin and the mess in my life. This is what the new covenant is all about. This is what Jesus came to initiate. He came to show us that it's not about us working really hard to move towards God. It's not about us pulling ourselves up by the bootstraps and doing good work after good work and trying to rid our lives of those things that corrupt us in order to earn God's love or somehow be in good standing with him. We can't earn it. Jesus initiates this. We don't do anything to deserve it. Some of you, you're brand new to church, not even sure what you believe. Maybe you just need to explore what it might look like to invite Jesus into your life for the first time. Because it's ultimately about the love that he has shown us. It's about him pursuing us in the same way that he pursued Matthew in the first century. His love will stop at nothing. And there's nothing that will get in his way. Not even our sin, not even our mess.